Hello everyone, I'm Daniel and I just wanted to record this intro for this following discussion about the remote viewing project that Farsight did about Bob Lazar. It's going to be a discussion between me and Aziz Brown, who was one of the remote viewers in that project. The project was done in 2024. The discussion took place 2025. And right now it's 2026. In regards to remote viewing, I did take a few classes, so I'm just sharing my own opinion. I took like 3 classes, learned beginner level, and I was successful enough to, at least for myself, to confirm that this is something that's probably works. I also taught the same basic procedure to about 10 people who were also successful. The fundamental structure is always a version of blind remote viewing, which means the remote viewer does not know the target. I've also tried double blind and single blind remote viewing. Both of them were successful. So I'm somewhat confident in this methodology, but anyone who is curious can take the classes on farsightprime.com and farsight.org. I will share some clips from the project as well, which belong to Farsight, but I got permission to share this, thankfully. So I'm very grateful to Farsight and to Aziz Brown for allowing me to sharing this project with you. In the discussion, there's one part at the beginning where Aziz is talking about something like a second UFO. I didn't originally put that part in the video, but I'm putting it in now because I did do a bit of research on that subject regarding, what was the first UFO that Bob Lazar saw at S4, which everyone, including me, assumed was the small model when he was employed at the S4 facility. But actually, there is a recording of John Lear, who was Bob Lazar's friend, that many months before Bob even interviewed for the position, for some reason, Bob took several trips to Groom Lake, Area 51, which is same general location as S4, and he saw something in the air. And that's possibly why his interest in this subject began, especially regarding Area 51, and that is why he ended up asking Teller to be employed there. So I'm going to play the first part of the session that Aziz did, and then I'm going to play an audio from John Lear, which was recorded by the researcher Signals Intelligence. And then the discussion will begin with Aziz. And I hope you enjoy.
I started off with seeing this irregular mountainous topography environment. I was seeing a subject in an indoor environment. I was seeing this sort of moderate to cool temperatures. I was perceiving that. It seemed a little warmer in the environment where the subject was. I got the sensation of maybe a non-surface structure above. It kind of just looked like a dot, but beyond that, I was just seeing bright light. It almost kind of looked like sunlight or something like that. Then there was this irregular slopes, these 2 irregular slopes, and then sort of a flat man-made structure shape in between them with sort of an opening. And that's kind of this flurry of perceptions that flew by my awareness when I was initially trying to perceive the target.
Before we met, or just at the same time we met, he was driving up to Groom Lake, and there's a place on a hill that you could see. You can't see the lake bed, but you can see the round range of mountains where it was. And he described seeing this light come up and then go down. And I think one of the trips he made was Joe Benedetti.
you've identified some clips from Farsight's Bob Lazar project, but yeah, how about you just take it away and show us some points of interest that we should dive into further? I'm really excited to see what else we can extrapolate from the data.
Yeah, I have. Obviously, it would be too long to show the whole project, but we have some clips. So we are going to. I have tried to organize them in a specific order, or try to figure out an order that makes sense. Obviously, this will be a bit speculative because there are many things that we heard from Bob Lazar, but in this project we also got a lot of new information which doesn't really fit anywhere, and it's I think those are the really interesting points. So I had to do a little bit of organizing with the clips too, so that we can make a possible storyline from that.
Nice, awesome. I'm excited to see it. So I see the first clip. It's got myself up there. So yeah, let's hit the play button and see what happens. I feel like I'm just perceiving sometimes a mountain, and there's like a structure, or structure R is like maybe inside of the mountain, and other times I'm perceiving this like wide and low structure. Maybe it's just flat man-made base surface, and the structure itself, it exists underground. And then I probe again, move inside and locate structure R, and I'm seeing this mountainous topography, lots of mountains in the background and a big mountain up front, and I'm seeing this sort of like hallway, this man-made long shaped hallway. And the opening kind of at first seemed like it was just some big boulder or rock, and I start deducting like Cheyenne Mountain Complex and stuff like that. But the textures, if I touch the mountain, it feels like it's natural textures, like a natural mountain, like rocky, gritty, mountainous textures. And then as I sort of follow this hallway down, it seems like I'm in this structure R, and it feels like it's this like massive place, and I'm wondering, I'm starting to perceive like that there's subjects inside, but not everywhere. It seems like there's some parts that are empty, and it sometimes I get a sense that maybe there's this second opening to get in here that seems more like it's just a regular path. I mean, it's a lot of perceptions just sort of floating around here.
Okay, so I wanted to start with this clip because I'm not sure where to put it, where it would fit with the rest. So I just want to reveal it at the beginning, because it has the kind of data that we would have expected normally, which is, this looks very much like S4. We have the mountains, we have the sort of the tunnel that goes into the mountain, and the entrance is on the right side, as Bob Lazar told us, and then it turns left. And as it turns left, what we don't see in this one, it would be connecting to the hangar doors from the inside, and from the outside you would also, not the hangar bay doors, but the hangars, it would connect to the hangars, and on the outside you would see the hangars themselves. So the reason, because the target was not this, but somehow Aziz managed to get here, and I was hoping you could, because I felt that your session specifically took a detour, let's say. So I wonder if you could, if you remember, you could tell us about that a bit.
Yeah, it was interesting. After the target reveal, I was a little disappointed that I didn't get more information on actually the craft itself, which is what the target seemed to focus a bit more on. But definitely there is some matching environmentals, just as you described earlier. The mountain arid environment that you would expect for the harsh desert climate in Nevada, for which this target took place at the S4 base, and also what you would expect for an underground or a hidden facility to be hidden in those mountains. That all did sort of come to the surface, and when I was showing up as a remote awareness to this target. I really, this is what I was seeing, and because I'm blind to the target, I don't really know 100% of like, okay, this is the thing that I'm supposed to be focusing on. I just see what I see and start moving through movement exercises to find out as much as I can about where I am. And this is basically that. This is what showed up. So it's having maybe one day in the future, remote viewers will be able to pull reliable data with front loading. But right for these projects, I'm not doing any of that. So going out there and seeing these arid mountains and then discovering this facility, this is pretty much it's sort of I get what I get is kind of what happens with the remote viewing session. Also, what's interesting is that when I started going down into structure R, once again, at this point, completely blind, not knowing if this is even an important part of the target that I should be spending time on, seeing these areas that were empty, I remember being a little perplexing. It was such a big facility down there, and I guess it makes sense when you have non-surface object hangars in the facility. That's understandable that they wouldn't constantly be chock full of people all the time, and the facility being so large, they would have multiple uses for just what's down there. But yeah, I just remember thinking that was a bit odd, that it was A, so big, and B, that there were areas with lots of activity and areas with not so much activity. But now in hindsight, I can sort of understand that a bit more. But yeah, that's sort of my perspective about just the clips that we've seen so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would like to mention that this is not the first picture you got for structure R, because that will be the next clip. But before we move on to that one, I would like to read the target, because I think it's important that we look at that a bit more, because obviously we will not know what kind of data we get unless we have a good target. And the target for this project was Bob Lazar at the time when he claims he observed the ET tech ship called the Sport Model at S4. Now that's the target, but that's not structure R, which I will share a bit later.
And then I moved to structure R, and I tried to describe structure R. And once again, I'm getting a bit confused here, because I'm seeing this barren, middle of nowhere type of landscape, and I'm deducting like maybe it's the moon or something like that. And then I'm seeing this wide, massive structure. And then I start to label this structure Y instead of structure R, just to give it a new distinction, because I'm really just getting confused. I feel like at first I saw subject A, and I had this strong sensation that subject A was inside of a non-surface structure, but now I'm seeing this massive wide structure in the middle of nowhere, and I don't know where I am. It just seems like nothing's really making sense. And I mean, honestly, the structure looks like I'm deducting like a big citadel from like the video game Age of Mythology or something like that. I mean, it just seems like I just can't make heads or tails of these environments, because they just don't seem to fit together.
So this clip is before the other one, and this is going to start the real narrative that I'm building here. And whether it's true or not, what we are going to combine, essentially, we don't know for sure, but we have to start somewhere, and maybe in the future we can verify this data and this storyline that we will see. So let me read what structure R is. Structure R is the first UFO being observed by Bob Lazar at S4. Now this, for a normal person, this doesn't look like a UFO, but who says that a UFO has to look like a disc, has to look like a specific shape? Why can it be like a wide object that is made of stone? We have all these perceptions or ideas about UFOs, what they should look like. So the fact that we have some kind of structure on a base surface, I think it's important to know that it might be an UFO, even if it's on the surface and even if it's made of stone. And this is what I would like to explore as we move on. For now, I would like to ask Aziz a bit about remote viewing, because as I read a few minutes ago the target, which said, it said, Bob Lazar at the time when he claims he observed the ET tech ship called the Sport model. So we are talking about the time frame when he says, right, when he claims he observed something, and not the time when he actually, right? If it depends when he's speaking to somebody else that he says that he's seen something. So just because we are getting a different object, which is not, right, the structure R is not even designated as the Sport model. It is designated as an UFO, and the Sport model, I'm not sure we can call it an unidentified object. So that's why I think we will see some variation, some ambiguity in the data. And I was wondering what you're thinking about that right now.
It's a good question. It's with regards to the structure R and the structure Y that I've written down over there, there is a bit of an error on my part in not recording enough data, because I did give a verbal description of saying that I was getting confused because I had competing perceptions. I was at some point seeing subject A and a non-surface structure, and I didn't write out a picture for that. I drew it out in paragraph form, but I didn't write out a picture for it. But then I sort of focused in on the perspective of what we've just described, seeing this massive wide structure on the base surface, labeling that structure Y instead, and that's the recording that I had for for that perception as well. Technically, I feel like I should have, in hindsight, I should have actually given out the proper sketch for the other competing perception, which was the non-surface structure, and given it more than just a paragraph. But that is something that sort of these sort of things happen in remote viewing. When you're doing a session and you have competing perceptions, the rule of thumb is when in doubt, write it down, or when in doubt, follow the procedure, which is to write it down. I wrote down, I did follow it in the sense that I did write down verbal descriptions of what was going on, but I think this session could have definitely benefited from a proper sketch of the competing perception of the non-surface structure that I saw. However, the mind, I don't want to doubt what happened with the visual of this massive wide structure that is labeled structure Y in this environment. That definitely could have a significant part in the overall identity of structure R, similar to what you were describing. And just going off of what we do know, which is basically anecdotal from Bob Lazar's story, as well as the data that came out of the remote viewing session, there are multiple structures in the S4 environment, and seeing a massive wide structure Y, that could potentially have something quite integral to do with the identity or the frame of the target as it showed up. However, there could definitely be more to unpack with that if I was to revisit the session blindly somehow as a remote viewer once again. But that is an interesting point to make. There is a bit of a split off in the perceptions. The fact that I saw two perceptions and I saw them sort of competing with each other, but I'm not sure how on the top of my head specifically how structure R and structure Y are related, but that is what the subspace mind showed me. So there definitely probably is a significant aspect to the story that does deal with something like a structure Y at the S4 location. There is an interesting aspect to that, in the sense that because I'm not actually a camera, when I do pop up at a target as a remote viewer, my own personal perspective of what catches my eye tends to be what I focus on. And this is actually, we have protocols for this. We actually worry about something called door knobbing, which is basically a case like that, like where you would pop up at a target and you would focus in on something that maybe isn't exactly something that has to do with what the prompt specifically says, but it was there. It was at the target. But when you deal with the movement exercises, that allows you an opportunity to sort of break away from the door knobbing specifically. However, because I'm not a physical robot or a camera, when I do pop up at a remote viewing target, that puts me in the location on which the target prompt does describe. However, it doesn't actually it doesn't remove the person quality that I have, which is to just sort of be there and just look at whatever catches my eye first, and then that becomes the dominant perception. And that's and clearly this resulted in a structure Y being what was the sketch on paper instead of the competing perception, which was the non-surface structure.
Well, so my idea or the way I see it is that you got the target and you actually did a drawing of the first perception, the first non-surface structure, and it's not just paragraphs. So there is a picture somewhere. But I think, as we will see it, you were on target. You just didn't think you were on target. That's what I'm going to show, or I hope to show. So I'm not criticizing anything. I'm saying this is the target. These are the structure R, and that was structure R, and I'm going to prove it to you. So we can go to the next clip. But before, let me just describe this structure R that you have drawn. So we have an oblong shape. We have something on the top. We don't know what's on the top, but it's an oblong shape. It looks like a building. It seems to be maybe made. You said it was like a building from Age of Mythology, like a citadel, right? Which implies that it's made of stone. And there's an entrance in the middle, right? In the middle. And at S4, I don't think Bob Lazar never described anything like this at S4. And I don't think you have many stone structure at Area 51 either. So that's the first structure R. And I think this is structure R and not structure Y. And that, I believe this is like a deduction, or it feels like I understand that you are getting multiple perception, but we will see that this structure R will come through in the data of the other viewers as well. So let's go.
Okay, so now we're going to move to a structure R. Okay, what's this structure R? So it feels like a fairly large structure. It looks like angular. It has angular edges, and then it looks like it kind of has levels to it. The texture is interesting because it's kind of like pebbly. Yeah, there are subjects inside. Yeah, it's pretty large. This for sure is like a very unique architectural style. I wouldn't say it's common at all. Yeah, and the subjects inside, definitely like it's on a base surface, and I'm getting an opening right there. Okay, moving inside, I'm seeing like a bunch of subjects, I'm seeing objects.
Okay, so this is also structure R, and I believe this looks a lot like the previous structure R. We have an oblong shape, something on the top, and there's an entrance in the middle. Also, it's a stony structure, just like that that citadel from Age of Mythology. which I actually checked, and there are some that have like straight up sides, and some of them are actually at an angle. So, what do you think, Aziz? Do you think that this looks like that other structure?
Yeah, no, this is it's uncanny. It's a very similar perception that Intisam got to what I ended up getting for my structure R experience. So yeah, you definitely a similar shape, similar type of deduction in terms of my deduction for that Citadel concept from the video game Age of Mythology. But yeah, no, you're on point. There is a parallel here.
Yeah, and let me just say that Structure R was defined as the first UFO being observed by Bob Lazar at S4. So this possibly is an UFO, and that might explain those three like hooks or protrusions on the sides, on both sides. We will see if this is also a recurring image. But yeah, it's very unique. It's not something you would expect to see at Area 51, right?
Yeah. Are you implying that this might be another UFO that was not the sport model, but something else that he ended up seeing at the S4 site?
Yes, I think this might be the first UFO as the target described. At this point, it's on the surface, but maybe it can fly, and maybe it flew in from some place, maybe the moon, maybe some place. It could have came from anywhere, but or it might be somehow there somewhere. But yes, that's what I'm saying. That maybe this is like an extraterrestrial UFO, a much larger than the sport model, and one that Bob Lazar never talked about, or anyone has ever talked about something like this. And that's why it's interesting, because by some accident we are getting data that doesn't seem to be in the story of Bob Lazar, but it does fit to some extent with his story, but it is different.
Interesting. Yeah, this is fascinating. I would like to see more from this train of thought, because that definitely does track as something that, I mean, I wonder if he was even aware of it, if he saw it there, if he registered that this was a UFO, because technically, given the nature of remote viewing, even if he personally, on a personal level, didn't register, oh, that thing can fly, but saw it, that would still come across as the target data is dealing with nonlinear space and time, and it doesn't have a specific attachment to his psychology. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think because the target is a UFO, and in the description we already described the sport model as something specific. I think the perception of the viewers is being pushed away from the sport model to something else, anything else, anything but the sport model. And that's why, if there is something else, and that's why maybe this is why this has happened, and we will actually see more of this as we go on.
I'm getting here a base surface with irregular topography. There's this area that feels like deduction, maybe like a pit or an area that's had some destruction to it, but it feels like a piece has been taken out of this area. But I also have this object above the base surface, a square shape. I see some protrusions or objects coming out of this. It does feel more like an object than a non-surface structure. Like, if it is a structure, I don't see subjects inside of this structure, but I'm going to call it an object here. But this is a large, dark object, square, boxy shape. I have blue, dark hues surrounding this area, as well as like orangish, brownish hues on the base surface.
Okay, so what we have here, I think it's pretty obvious that we have and also a similar structure, but it's different because it doesn't have anyone inside. The protrusions is only on one side, and they seem to be like hooks instead of just, something extending. So what my idea is maybe this was connected to that other UFO or structure R, that these can somehow combine and make one bigger UFO. And right now, as maybe it's coming down, there is a place where this smaller non-surface structure is landing, which is a pit. What do you think about that?
Well, it's definitely interesting. The idea of the I guess we can call them spokes, or the protrusions coming out at the side of the rectangular structure, that definitely is similar to the previous design that Intisam drew out. It's also interesting to see it in the context that Shantae has drawn it out. The idea of a pit, she drew it out as an angular thing, and the idea of the angular other object fitting inside of it in some way, even loosely, just as being able to sit in there, is that's also interesting. The idea of those spokes linking together is an interesting concept. My first thought with the idea of the spokes was wondering if it had some sort of electrical function, just like how I guess on transformers or there's these on large electrical devices. I don't exactly know the proper term for them, but there's these long circular things that sort of stick out. And I'm wondering if that maybe, if we are to assume that this is an electrical object, if that served some sort of function, even if it's not made of a material that we would typically associate with the modern transformers that we have on our power lines and in power plants and stuff like that. But yeah, that is definitely a peculiar thing. During her session, she was her subspace mind clearly drew her to that visual. So it does fit in a very interesting spot in the session to match up with those other perceptions that you were talking about. So yeah, it's peculiar. It's definitely an eyebrow raiser.
Yeah, it's an interesting coincidence. Also, when you remember when you saw the previous structure R, the top was just like a not a square, but like a protruded square, and this is also something like that. One interesting point I would like to make is that there's John Lear, who was a friend of Bob Lazar, actually has a page about a pit just next to Papoose Lake, which is where S4 should be, because when Area 51 was built, all the data, all the elevation data has been cleared from all the sources, but somehow it seems that they missed one, because some of the airplanes have some kind of system where they can look at the surface and get data from that, and from that people were able to create elevation maps, and it's very clear that there is a pit to just south of the alleged location of S4. So maybe that's this pit, I'm not sure, but there are pits there according to some of this data, which is quite interesting as well.
Super interesting. Yeah, definitely.
And what I'm thinking about is that it seems that this object is empty. So maybe it's coming down, going to the pit. Maybe something is taken inside, or something is taken from inside, and then it maybe leaves. So I'm wondering about that. If that's the function of it, if it just detaches, goes to the pit, and it's just a transportation device, essentially, possibly.
Interesting. Yeah, this just in regards to the pits, I'm not sure if it would be natural or man-made pits, but I do know from
this is definitely man-made.
Man-made. These are man-made pits. Interesting. Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. It's I do know there was the environment there is it used to be covered by water long ago, but it's to see that there would be development there is not surprising, which would match with the idea of the pits and just the general choice to locate S4 where it is. So yeah, very interesting.
Bullet-shaped non-surface structure. We're going to call this NSS-R, or non-surface structure R. I'm moving to this non-surface structure R at time S. Large structure, very oblong shaped. Slight dome, has subjects inside, multiple. Moves very fast, high vibrations. Seems to hover or glide over land. Subjects are also on the base surface outside. There's this glowing that emits from the non-surface structure R, very noticeable. Takes up a large portion of the sky, and it's very low down. Like it's not so far up there that it looks small, like it's low enough to look huge.
Yes, I think this might be the same structure because it's an oblong shape and it's huge. So it's probably not the sport model, and it might be the same structure, or because it's somewhere down low at this point. What do you think?
Interesting. Yeah, she definitely described it as a non-surface structure, which is different, but it's also it would be interesting to see it as something that is down low. But the idea that she's definitely picked up is that she's seeing it not touching the base surface, which is a stark difference from what my earlier perception was, which was is an interesting addenda. But yeah, she did call it an oblong shape.
Next, I'm going to move to structure R and describe this structure. I'd say this is a structure with very unique architecture. I'm seeing multiple segments. I'm seeing a central main area, but there are kind of segments, multiple segments extending from this main area. And they have kind of a rounded shape to them. So this structure R is a very large structure. It's a non-surface structure, and it just feels like very complex.
Yes, so this structure R is also very large. There's a main portion and there are smaller portions connected. Now the one difference that we could hear is that it seems more rounded, but I'm wondering if that's because all the parts are connected. But of course it's also possible that this is a different non-surface structure. But it does make you think that maybe this is the same structure at a different time. Maybe when all the parts are connected, maybe it looks like this. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because her perceptions definitely started from inside the structure. And also it's very interesting that she also perceived it far more similar to Yeme's in the sense of immediately picking on it being a non-surface structure, or in that sort of perspective. Also, it's, as you were saying, the idea of parts fitting together is really interesting. We know that they were reverse engineering this stuff. So the idea of, or trying to reverse engineer this stuff, learning as much about it as possible. So the idea of some parts being, or it being in parts and then being put together as a solid part, that's not something that would be out of left field for the environment that this is taking place in. So it's that's pretty fascinating. But yeah, she definitely picked up her perception. It's very interesting from being inside, just where she's starting off, and seeing the sort of curved elements to it as it's all completely put together as a non-surface structure.
Yes, it's. We will see if. I'm wondering if this is not even something that belongs there. I'm wondering if this came here for a purpose, did what it had to do, and then left, or maybe it's like it comes there, but it's not part of the surface establishment. That's what I'm thinking about, because this is such an extraordinary structure. Obviously, it cannot fit. Such a large object cannot fit into any of the hangars. So I'm wondering if it even has a place there, other than, maybe when it's taken apart.
That's an interesting hypothesis. Yeah, definitely. It's the idea of it being in parts is definitely a new concept to me, given the data. But it is definitely an interesting train of thought to go in, given the other bits of data that you've pointed out in the other clips. So it's I'm interested to find out more about what you saw with this regards to this project, because it is an interesting conclusion.
Subject A on the base surface, and he's kind of looking up at structure R, and it looks a little more compact, like still similar rounded features or shapes, but it just has a different appearance, and subject A is looking up at the structure R.
So I think it's interesting that this shape can change. It seems to be able to get closer together. And it seems that at this time, which is time S, which is when time S is the time when Bob Lazar sees the first UFO fly for the first time. And this is the first UFO structure R. Structure R was called the first UFO. So, and subject A is Bob Lazar. So what I'm seeing here is just that the shape can change and it can become compact. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's definitely, I can definitely say that such things are plausible. Also, it's interesting, if she's describing it as a different shape, she's also describing it as a different shape in the process of not being attached to the base surface. So it might have a different look to it for sure from any viewer's perspective when it's off the base surface and up there. Also, her analysis of the external side of the shape is given a more intricate understanding of what the internals look like, considering that her first perceptions started off as perceptions of the structure inside. So I would definitely say that given that perspective, it is potentially a more accurate image of the outside, given that she gave time to understand the inside of the target before, or the inside of the structure before moving outside and seeing that view of subject A, looking at it from a distance. So yeah, interesting. Definitely could look different in the air.
Yeah, and if we are thinking about these outside parts extending, it's not impossible that they can just fly away, right?
Yeah, that's definitely not impossible, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, this would be the most dominant element in this time S. I'm going to call this non-surface structure, I'm going to call it structure Y. So there are subjects inside the structure Y. So this would be what it looks like inside. So I'm seeing white walls that are curved. There's various surfaces, so both of these surfaces emit light. There are subjects within them. It looks like the subjects are busy. Kind of like just interesting gizmos and gadgets to this, and these little objects that are moving around this environment. So now we have some subjects here. Let's move into a collective deep mind probe of the subjects. So I'm getting like a sense of enjoying themselves, or there's something here that feels it's thrilling to them. It feels like whatever they're doing here, it feels like it has some work energy. There's something work purpose to it. They're trying to obtain something that feels quite valuable to them. I'm also getting the energy like whatever they're doing here, it kind of feels like they've done it before. Okay, I'm not getting anything else. So
Yeah, I think many people will recognize this one as the sport model. So it seems that the sport model was also there, which is, of course, also part of the target. So it's not that surprising. So as far as I could tell, most people got the structure R at some point. At least that's what I'm getting at. But sometimes we got a glimpse of the sport model. And let me just tell you that this inside is very similar how Bob Lazar described the sport model. Those two boxy shapes, there should be three, but from the size you would normally probably only see two of them because they are spaced in a triangular shape. And these are the boxes that contain the gravity amplifiers or gravity emitters. It depends which part, but the idea is that those are above the surface level and they are hooked to this, they are hooked inside the boxes, and the energy goes from those boxes down to the amplifiers themselves or the emitters. So I'm not sure if they should have any light, but it's not surprising that something has so much energy would appear as such. And I think this is a really good description of the sport model.
I can also emphasize that when a remote viewer is looking at something, they have a different perspective of lights and colors. That is, I guess the scope of light and color that they're able to see in the remote viewing process is more than what the rods and cones of our eyes typically inform our brain about when we're just looking at something in the physical world. So that could also be a light that is very visible to her specifically because she's observing the scene as a remote viewer and not as a physical person right there. So it's also, that might not be the case. There might actually just be lights that have a different function in the room as well. But yeah, very, very much possible that is a function of remote viewing. Finally, my final flash sketch, I was seeing basically what looked like a planet. It was just a circular shape within a dark space. And then two other smaller things that were just sort of floating off to the side. One was also seemed a little bit more circular, and the other one seemed a bit more triangular, maybe not triangular, just sort of angular shaped. It just a bunch of different angles were on it. But yeah, two much smaller things were floating out there as well.
Yeah, I've been wondering about these two objects because it sort of fits the idea that we had two non-surface structures, two UFOs. One of them, the sport model, the rounded one, and the other one is with the angles, with the different angles, because as you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be triangle. I am a bit concerned because I'm not 100% certain that the round one is the sport model, but I think it is possible that it came, that sport model went out and came back. So it is possible, but this is an early perception. This is a flash sketch you drawn, and I get the feeling that maybe your subspace mind was trying to inform you that, because the subspace minds can read the targets very well, and maybe it's trying to inform you that, I understand that you're thinking that there's only one non-surface structure, but there's actually two. And maybe it's trying to communicate that idea to you.
It's an interesting perspective on it because it's definitely, when these early flash sketches come through, there's always some nugget of data that I can look back in the flash sketches and value it a lot more in hindsight after finishing the whole project. And this might be one of those. I mean, you have a situation here that there are definitely two non-surface structures. They're very high above the base surface, so high that I would just say that they're removed from the planet altogether. And yeah, that is a peculiar perspective and an interesting conclusion to make from the fact that I'm seeing two of them. Also, we do know from other projects, though, that it isn't really quiet out there in our local space, I guess, outside of the planet. We know that there is just active secret space activities between all manner of non-surface structures. And if this popped up with regards to the Bob Lazar project, with regards to investigating his story, it's very plausible that it could have something to do with the actual scene, sort of the subspace mind doing exactly what you say, showing a scene where there are multiple non-surface structures involved in this story. So it's very possible. It's a very interesting thought that you brought up.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that according to Bob Lazar, the sport model was capable of interstellar travel, so it could have gone that far up. But of course, it's also possible that this is a different UFO and we have a third UFO, but based on the data, I cannot make that assumption either way. Right now, I'm working with the idea that there's only two.
It's very possible, even whether he saw it himself or not, it's very possible that they could have taken the sport model up very high outside of the orbit, outside into orbit, or further, if they wanted to. I mean, if it was capable of interstellar travel, just like he said, and they were able to fly it in the S4 location, I definitely would think that the odds are they would have eventually taken it further out into space and then brought it back. That's personal idea as well.
Okay, so he moves past this like weird street, and then I'm seeing this. As I keep following him, now it kind of looks like he's inside a structure. The walls are really, really high. Another one right here. Very tall walls, dim, dark sort of lighting. So this would be the subject. How would I even draw this? This is a very, very high wall. There's another one on this side. Right in front of him, there's something, I don't know what it is, but it's reflective in quality. And then right here, there's an object. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else. Like, I'm looking around, I'm not really seeing any subjects around. So, but this, whatever this is, it might be water, but I don't know. What I do know is it's reflective. So it's dark, right? Tall ceilings, this thing, and then an object right there. So this is what I see as I follow him.
So right here we can see that as the remote viewer was following Bob Lazar, we get this strange place. It's a dark corridor, a very tall ceiling, and a reflective surface on the bottom, which is not, I would say it's fair to say that this is not a normal place in a military base. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Well, it's definitely not typical, given the description so far. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if maybe I'm not sure. It's possible that this is actually inside of Structure R, or it might be a place that Bob Lazar reached by going inside Structure R and then going somewhere. So, because we are right, the remote viewer is essentially staying at one place for this project. For at least for this is focus one still. So we are still in the around Structure R, the first UFO, the first time Bob Lazar sees the UFO. I think it's possible that we are inside of Structure R, and that's why it looks different from a normal description of a military structure.
He did state that he went inside of it. I seem to remember him talking about that, right?
Yes, but this is before structure R, so we don't know. It might be S4 as well.
Interesting. Anyway, then I tried to move inside structure Y and describe, and then I started seeing these long, tall, narrow pathways, just a bunch of narrow pathways. Seemed like a lot of dark, narrow spaces. And I saw this sort of shape that kind of looked like a mountain or like an artificial mountain. I had this sensation maybe it was an artificial mountain. And then I started to perceive maybe this was like a big non-surface structure that was just had these sort of mountainous tiered shapes where it sort of just blockily went up. Things were just getting really confusing.
So I know this is a AI image, and in your paper session I couldn't read that the surface was reflective, but this surface interestingly is reflective, and it is a tall ceiling, dark, essentially somewhat dark, and it has this reflective surface on the bottom. And maybe this is just a coincidence, and it probably is, but it does look a bit similar to the one that Intisam was describing. Would you say that?
Yeah, it's uncanny. Yeah, it does match. It's very interesting that you bring that up. I wouldn't have seen that connection otherwise, but yeah, you're right.
And keep in mind, even though you said structure Y, but you only called it structure Y because you didn't like, or because you had this two structure R and mixing structure R with structure Y. So, and you're even trying to locate in this part, you're trying to locate structure R. So that's why I'm kind of thinking that maybe this is actually inside of structure R.
Interesting. So yeah, you're saying that in my attempt to look for the structure, I'm walking around inside the structure. And I could agree with that. It definitely matches the perception of what I'm seeing right now. It's clearly the indoor of structure. So yeah.
Deduction, I'd say this could be like a warehouse or just in general a space for storage of objects. These appear to be like shelves or just really tall walls or separations. So for scale, like this is subject A in this space. It's very small and this is a huge space. But there's a lot of objects in here. I'm getting a sense of, I'm getting a sense of a lot of movement by objects here. And my deduction is these are like robotic objects, robotic movements. Like there's an automation of tasks for objects in this area of the structure.
Okay, so this looks a bit like the one before, but I'm actually not sure. I kind of think this is a different place. If you look on the picture on the right side, which was drawn as the surroundings of Bob Lazar, I think that's the general surroundings Bob Lazar had at S4. So it's not some other place inside structure R, but but just generally, because there was some variation of when the remote viewers were describing the surroundings, and this is one where it was very early on. I'm not sure if we will come back to this surrounding, so I'm just going to say that this almost exactly matches of what Bob Lazar said. There are two tables, and on one of them you see the gravity amplifier and emitter. The only difference is that it's upside down. So even on the sport model, it would be facing down instead of facing up. And this kind of structure can move Then
I started to perceive these rows of cavities or windows, I guess I would call them. It was almost like I was seeing this cylindrical structure now, and kind of like if I was going to deduct like the Colosseum architecture or like an office, like a modern office structure, but it's just cylindrical. Like, there's sort of sections that make up each window, or sections that make up each cavity along the curve of that cylinder. That's sort of what I was perceiving, that pattern. So regardless, it just seemed like a curved, sort of cylindrical-ish shaped structure.
So this is very interesting, I think, because this is also seems to be like a stone structure or something made out of stone, or because you're saying it looks like the Colosseum. And there are no places like that, presumably at Area 51, because humans don't really construct these anymore. But I'm wondering if this is actually inside of structure or something that could have been reached by maybe flying off to a different place or going through a portal. I'm not sure, but somehow this might be connected to structure art because it has that stony old look as well.
That's an interesting thought. The stone texture wasn't exactly a perception that I was describing, more of just that's all I could think of in my own personal experience that had the pattern that I was trying to describe, which was that I guess the AI image up there can showcase the pattern, but instead that's not a cylindrical pattern. That's more of a concave sort of curve right there. But I was seeing that sort of pattern on a cylindrical structure, and the nature of that cylindrical structure I don't remember on the top of my head, but it was something I must have described in the session itself, something about the texture.
Yeah, well, I think it will be more clear as we move on, because this structure comes back.
Kind of seeing a round or cylindrical shape. There's multiple subjects here, but they're kind of like different levels. So there's subjects at this bottom area, and then I have what seems to be a few more subjects at the top here. Deduction, there's like an observation here, like these subjects are at the top are looking down at these lower area of subjects. I have here, there's very bright light, feeling the texture of this room, or I guess it's an enclosed space. It feels very hard and smooth. Deductions like a stone, maybe constructed of stone, but just a very hard enclosure here. And I'm feeling a kind of unpleasant, uneasy vibe here. Oh. It feels like a focus gathering. I'm gonna deduct this like a chamber, but it just feels like these subjects come here to watch the activity of these other subjects.
Yeah, so I think the Colosseum was actually a very striking description of what this place actually is, because you have all these people at the top observing the people on the bottom. And if you recall at the beginning, she said that she was following subject A, in other words, Bob Lazar. And the question is, did he go to the bottom or did he go to the top? But I'm going to assume that he did go to the bottom, and people are observing whatever is happening at the bottom from the top.
That's interesting. And she did actually bring up stone texture by name as well, which is very interesting. And yeah, you're right. It does match the look and the energy of the Colosseum archetype. So yeah, very interesting.
It's very bright inside, very large, has different corridors within it. I see what looks like tables or beds of some sort, places that have control panels. I've got deductions of like operations or to operate in some facet. I also have deduction of crates or bins or cages.
Yeah, so this might not be the same place because we don't have that much visual data, but there seems to be some tables and some people and some cages. So it might be that bottom area, I'm not sure, but either way, there's some kind of place where you have tables, and you probably have Bob Lazar at that place at one time because that's the target. So let's move on because, the only thing I would like to mention is in this description, it's also very bright. We had the dark corridors and this bright place. And so that one thing does match in these parts.
Very interesting. Following subject A, it looked like subject A was going through this door or through this opening in a wall, and it seemed like this other environment seemed to have a lot of elevated objects that kind of looked like desks or these rectangular shapes. I didn't think they were desks. That's just the closest thing that I can sort of associate with it, but it just seemed artificial in nature, and it just seemed like subject A's intention was to just walk through into this other room. Now, this other room also, it seemed like I deducted like a college classroom or auditorium because it had these sort of tiered levels where it was sort of stepped down in elevation as you went further into the room, and it had these sort of rectangular blocky shapes around, and there were these sort of artificial bluish hues lights and a darkish hued visual around the walls and stuff like that.
Yeah, so this is interesting because we have so we are following subject A, Bob Lazar, and he goes, it's not a Colosseum, but maybe from his perspective it looked like an auditorium, like a classroom, because of all these tables, and that even you're not confident calling these tables. The tables are actually a reoccurring element of this session, so I'm actually leaning towards the tables interpretation. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I didn't know enough about Bob Lazar's story of the way that he's described these, I guess, table-like things that he has actually put into his testimony. But yeah, clearly the energy, the baseline energy of subjects at higher tiers of elevation observing other subjects at lower tiers of elevation, that does seem to be a common thread between multiple remote viewer reports around this point in the session, which is it's pretty fascinating and good to see correlating data in remote viewing projects like this.
Yeah, and I'm beginning to think, why is Bob Lazar in this place with the tables and the observation? What's happening? So let's try to find out.
There is a separation of these subjects. So there's a large amount, and this what feels like that main area, like here. So, but I do also have a separation towards this top area. I see two subjects. These feel like kind of important subjects, and there's some connection. It feels like these two subjects kind of balance each other out here. And there's also separated subjects in these outer pods or sections. So just continuing to probe here. Even with the large amount of subjects here, it's noticeably quiet. Some of these subjects here feel like they're out of place, like they're all in the same structure, but they're not all connected. I'm getting more like dark hues. these subjects definitely have a different appearance up here, but there's some relevance to the way these subjects are separated here, and I'm sensing some confusion among some of these subjects.
Yeah, so we go back to structure R, and as you can see, there's a separation on the top, which has been a reoccurring element, and there are some attachments on the left and the right. And we have subjects in the pods and inside, and they are separated, and there are some interesting fellows at the top who seem to be the organizers of this, what's happening there. What are you thinking about? What's happening?
Well, there's definitely a correlation between the observers and the observed being an element of this this target across multiple remote viewers. The observers, consistently being at a higher elevation, looking downwards, and as Shantae described, she's even describing them in more detail as just having a different appearance altogether. The ones who are sort of up there on that platform looking downwards. Also, it's interesting that she has further described these separate rooms or compartments full of subjects that are sticking off from the main body at like angles, sort of like spokes around it. So yeah, that's it definitely matches the other people's perceptions of observer and observed dynamics.
Yes, and based on the people, just how many people seems to be in this structure, this has to be a huge structure.
Yeah. Next, I started to just get a flurry of flashes of things that I was trying to be aware of as I was following subject A and just trying to describe what subject A sees. And then I started to see just a very wide gray hues room. It seemed to have like a concrete walls look. And once again, it did seem like I was seeing these prison bars with subjects on the other side of the prison bars. And I did sort of see this, what kind of looked like a non-human subject. It sort of seemed to have a snoutish nose. And it also had like a veil over its or like a hood. It was like it was wearing a hoodie, or maybe not a hoodie in the sense of like a modern hoodie, but it just had a cloak or a hood over its head. But I could see that it was a non-human subject and its face was protruding a bit. But it's that's pretty much a couple of the visuals that I was seeing just following subject A.
Yes, so we have heard about cages before, and that seemed to be presumably in structure R. And this is also possibly in structure R. And that hooded reptilian might be one of those who were at the top. Possibly. So, and we have some subjects there. So, and based on the number of these cages, there might be, and possibly other rooms, there might be a lot of people in this structure. Would you say that?
Yeah, it's the theme of cages was shared by multiple remote viewers. The idea of the non-human subjects being present in some sort of observational separate environment, that would match how Shantae described subjects that were dressed very differently and had a darker hue to them, being in this upper compartment, just looking down at the other subjects. That would be interesting as well. One thing we know from different remote viewing projects, just to say is a blatant fact of our reality, is that assets or resources includes subjects. So the idea of cages that hold subjects, that shouldn't be abnormal for anyone in the audience to be looking at, because in this world, resources and assets are not just things, but people too. And cages, prison bar sort of environment is just a container to hold that type of asset. So thinking of it as just a matter-of-fact thing and sort of removing the emotionality from it helps sort of bring into perspective why something like this would even be there without sort of labeling it as something that would involve a lot of emotional responses to seeing something like that. But yeah, very par for the course.
Yes, I agree. I have seen some of the other projects you have done and the others have done, and these gauges do appear a lot, but I think it might have been a new thing for Bob Lazar. I don't think this was a common experience for him, because you were following Bob Lazar, and I wonder what he felt, if he was completely conscious at this point, because we cannot know this, but I wonder what he would have felt seeing these cages and this being, if he did see it.
It's a good point. It'd be interesting to find that one out for sure.
For sure, there are no mentions by him or anyone ever seeing these beings or these cages or this structure are, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
I see a number of subjects, mixture of human and non-human subjects. Some seem to coexist with each other on the non-surface structure. Others seem like they're there a bit against their will, against their better judgment, I should say, against their better judgment. Feels like subjects are being gathered or taken from the base surface, then placed back, almost exactly where they were taken from. Some don't come back. Collectively, in their minds, I'm doing deep mind probes collectively here. Collectively, I am picking up on a specific subject. We're inside the non-surface structure. The subject is not 100% human. Has these slit beady eyes, small nose with large holes. Ears are very close to the face. Thin mouth when closed. When closed, the mouth is very thin. Slightly wrinkled skin. This subject seems to be somewhat in authority on this non-surface structure. Bald, skin has texture. He sort of reminds me of an albino gecko, but like a gecko in human form. Like if I were a shape-shifting gecko, I would kind of have those gecko-looking abilities, or like amenities, is that what they call it? I don't know, whatever. Visual effect here, but I'm in my human form, and then I transform.
So I think that albino gecko might be the same person or individual or ET that you have seen, Aziz, and we kind of get what this whole operation is about. It seems to be that they are gathering people, maybe observing them and then putting them back. Do you think that's what's happening?
It could. It might be a bit more nuanced in terms of all the pieces being there. Could be some things that the remote viewers are seeing across the environment of the target that may not be related into a single narrative. But the idea of that non-human subject that EMA just described being similar to or the same as the one that I also described, that would be very understandable, knowing that those types of beings would just be in the environment, be in the facility, especially considering if you look at other sources like the Lacerda files, shape-shifting aside, just looking at just the lizard form, or the non-human form that they would have, that form has a lot of, I guess, human-like qualities in the bipedal aspects, just from the body aspect. Of course, the face being very much a non-human face. Just the Lacerda described that, just for example, the females of their species still they have regular female human qualities, like the breasts and just the shape of the body and the maybe not the hands and the feet, but just the overall shape of a bipedal being. It looks very similar to the human, hence why I'm sort of thinking of that as Yeme describes the image of this non-human subject having human-like qualities along with it. That matches what we've heard of from other anecdotal reports of some reptilian species that are active here in the Earth environment.
It's also possible that this being is a shapeshifter and can just show itself as it wants to. But I would like to mention that we are still in a non-surface structure, so this is possibly belonging to this ET. But and maybe one day we will know.
And so then I start doing a cognitive impairment scale process, and different things come up. First, I start probing the internal brain, and as far as a high or low signature, I'm starting to feel a sense of general agitation in the internal brain, and that's sort of like on the lower end, but about the middle level. It's just, but the only evidence I'm perceiving of any impairment that's natural impairment in the brain, it seems more just emotional, just a sense of general agitation, and the agitation itself is the impairment, so that's not really too surprising. Next, I start probing for artificial levels of impairment, and I'm getting two massive different readouts that just popped up right away. At the low end, I'm sensing like absolute zero. There is no technological interference going on here. That was like a bare minimum at the very bottom. However, I did get at the very top a sense that there was just a high sense of maybe synthetic chemicals or liquids or maybe even medicines or just drugs in general that you would find at a pharmacy. But I just started getting this sense of synthetic chemicals or liquids of some sort. I just get the sense of like a vial with a silvery grayish sort of hued liquid. And that seems to be pretty high up on the cognitive impairment scale for artificial. In fact, it was at the very top. All right, so then I had hearing and physical levels of impairment that I was starting to perceive, and I got sort of a middle of the pack perception here. It seemed quite sort of in the lower middle areas in terms of impairment there, and I get the sense of the subject being told what to do by other subjects, but also I get the feeling of like pride and an eagerness to accept this fact. It doesn't feel like there's any bullying taking place or anything like that. I don't think bullying is a thing here, but it's more like pride in being part of these other subjects' work and happy to be on the big team and to do his part. It seems like I deducted patriotism. It doesn't really feel like it's exactly patriotism. It's more kind of like if you're in the military and you're happy to be taking orders because you're really proud about what you're doing. And it's that just seems to be the energy here in terms of hearing and physical impairment or influence on the mind. All right, so next I started probing for ET, extraterrestrial levels of impairment in subject A's mind, and I started to feel like this is I got two readouts. I got one once again at the very bottom of the scale and another one at the very top of the scale. Now the very bottom of the scale, it just felt like at this level it seems very dark and just completely unaware, just like there's just no level of awareness of extraterrestrial influence, period. And then at the very top of the scale, I don't really feel like this is like a direct extraterrestrial doing influence on the mind of subject A. I did not think that. The only reason it's even getting on the scale to say this point is because it feels like subject A is aware of an extraterrestrial presence that may be at the top of whatever hierarchical scale that he is involved with or dealing with, and he just has this awareness of as you go up the levels, it eventually is extraterrestrials at the top of the scale. So that seems like that's sort of just being aware of that. That's the interference level, and I wouldn't really. I don't know. You can say interference in quotes for that. So it's because it's not like a direct ET's interfering relationship. All right, so probing for artificial intelligence interference specifically, I got two pretty low ranking readouts for this, just the sense that there's no direct interference between artificial intelligence. That really wasn't a thing. And But I did get a sense, which I put a little bit higher, is just a general sense that there is an awareness that advanced technology is being used in the ethos of whatever this subject A is dealing with. And just being aware that advanced technology is being used, that sort of bumped it up on the scale just a little bit. But I once again, I would not call this direct like interference, so to speak. I just think it's just being aware of your ecosystem. So just being aware of your ecosystem. That's really what I would boil it down to. But that really does conclude the cognitive impairment scale for subject A.
So this is quite interesting. I think only who have done this cognitive impairment scale for some reason. But it's very interesting because this really fits the situation that Bob Lazar seems to be in, the mind, the physical and everything. I actually remember that Bob Lazar talked about drinking some kind of pine-smelling fluid at S4. And I also know that based on his diary that around the same time when he came back, it might not be related to the fluid, but when one of the days when he came back, he became extremely sick and had to seek a doctor. So some kind of, we don't know what was in this fluid, but it might have been some major. It might have induced some kind of something in Bob Lazar that we don't know much about. The other thing is, I find really interesting that even though he seems to recognize that there's some ET presence at the top of this military structure, I would say, it's actually not controlling him. It's not. Somehow it's not controlling his mind. He seems to be still in charge of himself, at least.
Fascinating. I did not know about the pine-smelling liquid part of his testimony, so that is really interesting to hear. Actually, there have been other testimonies I have heard of people who have gone to Area 51 and other secret military bases, and they had described either being injected with or having some sort of liquid implemented into their system before arriving. And that is really interesting. I didn't know that Bob Lazar actually shared that component of having to drink this pine-smelling liquid and that it got him sick eventually as well. So, I'm glad that you mentioned that. That's new data for me.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure if there's a correlation, but based on this chart, I would say there's some kind of correlation between the sickness and what he consumed.
Subject A at this point, it's mostly like he's listening to this other subject. This information that he's taking in, it feels foreign to him. He's puzzled. There's something here that's quite puzzling to subject A. He's thinking of his family, he's thinking of his community, and it feels like this other subject is giving subject A an object as well as information here, which is this. So this is what's being handed to him. And this object, it feels bulky yet small, but the object itself is information, is a form of information. The interaction here, it just feels like it's whatever is happening here, it's giving subject A a huge responsibility. It feels like he's being entrusted with something that's gonna be quite important. This something is important, but also it's gonna be very, very impactful. So this would be the object right here that's being entrusted to him. Yeah, and it's bulky, but then it's also like quite small.
Yeah, so we moved to focus 2. Until now we were at focus 1. The target for this part is event X, which is Bob Lazar being told what to say about his past at S4. Now there's no specific event in Bob like that, or it can fit many events, because there are many events possibly that would fit that description. And I think this is possibly one of them. It's quite clear to me that that object on the desk is the reactor, because it looks just like that. The reactor is simply like a cube, not a cube, but like a small box. And on the box there's a half a sphere, and that's how it looks. It's a very simple looking object, the reactor, which powers the sport model. And as we heard, this event seems to be about just giving information about the reactor, which Bob Lazar talked about a lot, to Bob Lazar, right? He's getting information about the reactor, and I think this event is more like not metaphorical, but something that's not literally. He's not getting this object. He's just getting the information, and he does have access to the object, but he's receiving the information, and the information will be important in the future.
I think you're right about that. Subject A is just surrounded by these dark formula-tired subjects, and Subject A looks a little different here. Subject A looks a little, maybe slightly more stout than he did in the previous image where I was looking at Subject A, so it's just Subject A's appearance just seems a little different. He was a bit leaner and a bit more lanky in the previous initial perceptions of Subject A. So now I'm probing what are these other subjects telling Subject A, and it feels like a pretty one-sided conversation where these subjects are instructing Subject A on something, and Subject A is trying to learn the details of some load of info quickly and get the details memorized correctly. Honestly, I just feel like this is a one-sided explanation of material to Subject A, and Subject A just sort of nods and says yes or okay, and I get the sense of like a paper being handed over, and or I guess I can deduct paper. I mean, it looks kind of like there's this diagram on it. It kind of seemed to have like a bluish hue, sort of like I deducted architecture paper, because that's, I don't know, there's this kind of like there's like a schematic or something on it, and it's or a pattern that's on it, and basically this diagram was sort of on this piece of paper. There's a bunch of words on it as well, and that's something that's being shown by these other subjects to Subject A, as Subject A is going through this process of memorizing and sort of just receiving as much of this information as quickly as Subject A can. So that pretty much, that sums it up.
So this is very similar to the previous one, but I think this takes place, if it took place as it is described, then it would have taken place much later, probably after Bob Lazar left S4. And I'm making that assumption because of the environment, because of the people, and because of you have seen that Bob Lazar had this bulky, he was wearing something. I think he was just wearing more clothing because it was possibly cold, because he was in contact, after he left S4, he was in contact with, at least with these men in black, I would say, at least until November. So for a very long time after he was kicked out, presumably, he was still in contact, which he said himself on a radio show at the time. And what we see in this paper, I think this is a gravity amplifier emitter together. And this is how it would look in the craft, right? You have the box on the top, and you have the arm going down, and then it can rotate in any way. So I'm guessing that Bob Lazar, because what I have come to know, unfortunately, is that Bob Lazar's memory is not that great. He forgets a lot, especially over time. So I'm wondering if this is like a reminder, okay, Bob, do you remember about this stuff that you worked on a few months ago? You haven't forgotten, right? And then you have these sketches to remind him. Because after this, he will start making a movie about his experience. So it's really important to get everything right.
It's a good point. I also do agree with you about the clothing that made him look a little bit more stout, because I also was thinking that myself in hindsight of the project. I started thinking for a while now that the stout appearance that I thought of Bob Lazar was actually, you know, when you tuck in a shirt, sometimes when you tuck in the shirt, everything can be quite slim, but other times as the shirt slightly untucks or something like that, you get these sort of just open areas in the back, open areas that sort of just full of air, but it's just, it makes a poofy appearance. So yeah, it could also just be more clothing, just layers of clothing as well, but I also was thinking it had to do with clothing. In addition, your description, I do know that he had those meetings now with multiple men in black or just people from the program who sought him out after he had left. So that does match, and I do think that probably happened around the time period that you're describing, which would have been after when he left.
So lastly, I'm going to look at a deep mind probe of subject A at event X here, and overall I'm getting negative emotions. It feels like subject A feels disappointed here, feels like he was misled. There's it's like the skills and knowledge that subject A has will not be appreciated, or he won't be able to use those skills here. And I'm also getting a sense of being like deduction, like homesick, but it's like this area where he was in previously that's kind of doesn't have access to that here. He's like missing his typical day-to-day activities. Also, this subject is not, it's like he does not have a desire to be around these other subjects that are here. It's not a good vibe around them, and it feels like subject A has like lost his freedom here, and it just overall feels very, very negative in this at event X. Subject A is missing something. He needs something to feel empowered here, and there's just not a lot of support from these surrounding subjects. So
yeah, so this is sort of what happened according to Bob Lazar, but it seems that there's a deeper meaning, or that it wasn't simply that he was let go, but that the whole purpose of him being there was to learn about the technology, and he didn't know that he would be used in this. He seems to be somewhat like a victim, someone who has been used for the purpose of disclosure, and he doesn't seem to be too happy about leaving, and it seems that a lot of problems are coming, because even in his own description, or even in his own recollection, he has been harassed a lot by some shady individuals after he left, being chased on the highway, or his house have been broken in, his car has been broken in multiple times. So it wasn't an easy process leaving, it seems. It wasn't something that you can just do, even if it was pre-planned. It seems like some aspects of the program you cannot just leave. And he wants to be empowered, but at the end of the day, nobody came out to help him, even though he said that he tried to get people on board, but that never happened.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do remember hearing about his part of the testimony where he described being run off the road on the highway and the general amount of paranoia that followed. So, yeah, this definitely seems like that perception might have been the beginning of a series of unfortunate events that befell him as he was moving outside of the project.
There's an event here we're going to call Event X. It's very loud, chaotic energy, lots of movement. There is, and I'm in focus 2 here, like there is some aggression in this focus at this event. This event has many components. There is a lot of mental chaos. Subject A is surrounded by other subjects. There's a pulling or dragging sensation that I feel. Subject A feels terrible here. Seems to feel placed in an unsafe situation, attacked, taken, drugged. There's discord here. They disagree with the confrontation that's happening here. People are getting hurt. And they're like, this is not what I agreed to. But it is what you agreed to, my love. Even if you were against your better judgment. There is opposition in the subjects around her. Collectively, I'm doing a collective deep mind probe here. I sense the opposition. I sense aggressors. Aggressors are here, but also innocent beings are here. Innocent beings, aggressors. Innocent beings are being taken advantage of. There are bad guys forcing subject A to do things they do not want to do. Feels like they're beating this subject A or hurting this subject, possibly erasing this subject. I'm probing for what's being said here. Yeah, I am picking up on an erasing of this subject here. When I'm probing for what's being said to her via these bad guys, terrible beings, they're hurting the subject, and I strongly believe they're taking from her right now, or from them right now.
So this part, I think this is what possibly really happened, that this is when Bob Lazar left the projects, and this is the peak of the conflict of Bob Lazar leaving. And Yeme even says that Bob Lazar, even before this, have lost some time, some memories of him being at S4. And we have seen previously a lot of events that we have never heard from Bob Lazar. And it is quite possible that the reason why he never speaks about this is he doesn't remember them, because he lost these events, the memories of these events. And what I can say for sure is that Bob Lazar, or with some amount of certainty, that Bob Lazar did lose certain days, memories of days. And that was the reason why he sought the help of a hypnotherapist named Lane Keck, whom I have spoken to, because he wanted to recover the memories of these lost events, because he remembered going there, he remembered coming back, and nothing between. So using hypnosis, he did try to get these back. Unfortunately, not all of these sessions are public, so I cannot say that these memories were recovered or not, but he did try to recover them.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that part of his testimony as well. It clearly, I guess just to summarize, we've got a situation where there is potentially more than the sport model, a second craft. And we have a situation where he has gone through a partial or memory erasure, which would have also explained why and none of the non-human subjects reported on in the session would have been a part of his original testimony. That could be part of these more exotic memories, may be part of what's still hidden or repressed as their nature being more exotic. He might be less susceptible to accepting those memories through the hypnosis recall that he's gone through, or maybe they just didn't work to that point. But Yeme's description that she just gave clearly does show a rather violent memory eraser separation from the program. So yeah.
Yes, and this memory erasure seems to have happened as the program was going on. So it wasn't like his memories were erased. The people knew what parts to take out then and there. So it seems to me that this craft, and I will summarize as well, that this structure R came down and it gathered a lot of people who have been observed, maybe tested, and then these people were placed back where they were, and then the memories were erased. And
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, you were saying?
No, that's all. That's all I have. And
that's pretty fascinating. The idea of him potentially being a part of a controlled disclosure event, basically coming out and explaining the sport model in detail, explaining these parts of his testimony in detail, and then the remote viewing sessions coming up with significantly more details that weren't shared, but then culminating in a memory erasure event that would have explained why not all the details that we found were made public, really does, it tracks well with elements of what he's actually said about that end process. And it also makes sense as to why he would have had these follow-up meetings with these men in black to sort of, I guess, prepare him for this next part of his existence post-memory erasure. So assuming that those happened, I'm assuming those things happened after the memory erasure, those subsequent meetings as he was pushed out of the program with the men in black, as you described earlier.
Yes, and I think it's possible because I heard this story from some people, or this idea that he wasn't even selected by humans for this task to reveal this information, but actually by the ETs. That even originally this was something planned beforehand for a very long time, and it was something that the humans simply assisted in.
That's very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense in the sense that also it matches other more mainstream disclosure narratives that we've seen. We've seen a consistent focus on the technology. Even with just the modern congressional reports, we've seen a consistent focus on, hey, this is the technology that's there. Let's just be hush-hush about all the human trafficking and all the more living and breathing extraterrestrials that are walking around sort of leading a lot of these projects. That part seems to be heavily suppressed, even in the more mainstream disclosure narratives that are happening more recently. But a very big focus on just the fact that, hey, look at this fancy technology and nothing else, just all the other elements that we've discussed earlier in these this overview of the Bob Lazar project that we have here. Those elements seem to be repeatedly repressed from the Bob Lazar perspective with the memory erasure and with the majority of mainstream UFO disclosure reports, like the ones that started off these congressional hearings talking about biologics, but not actually talking about living, breathing aliens talking with living, breathing humans in real time, making deals, having conversations. That part seems to be just consistently shoved under the rug. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think based on my understanding of Bob Lazar history, it's safe to say that someone with his background, with his history, would have never been selected from for this program, other than to be an individual to disclose it.
It is fascinating. And, well, hopefully he ends up watching this and gets to get a few more of those memories back. Because if he's out there trying to get his memories back, we can only wish him the best. Because I hope he gets them all back. Because that would be a real great thing for closure for him on a personal note.
Well, I think he did his part. So I hope from now on he can enjoy his life, and people will
Very true.
People will start believing